While we're loading that up, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Anastasia Goodstein, and I publish a site called Ypulse.com. It's a blog that I started back in 2004, and I cover what tweens, teens, and early 20-somethings are doing. So really ages 9 to 24. We aggregate news every day, what's happening in the space, and try to offer insight on what's happening as well. I also wrote a book, which I think is just now starting to get a little bit dated. It was published in spring of 2007. It's called Totally Wired, What Tweens and Teens Are Really Doing Online. And I think now that so many of you are getting on some of these same sites, we're seeing how this is shifting. But I'm going to talk today about understanding and reaching tweens and teens, mainly teens. I want to go a little bit older. I know a lot of what we've been talking about today has been younger kids. All right, we all know who this is, right? Judy Jetson. She was, if you think about it, sort of the original Totally Wired teen, and I think we were listening to Mark Prensky in Warren's talk, but he coined the term digital native, right? And while it's not a perfect term to describe this generation of teens, they've obviously grown up online. They're sort of more intuitive users. I think Alice from Cartoon Network said earlier, we still have to read the directions, figure stuff out that way. These kids are sort of just pounding on it and figuring it out in their own way. They're not necessarily computer geeks, although some of them definitely are, but most, I would say, aren't. Most actually don't ever really change their default settings on social networking sites, which we've been talking about a little bit. But, I think it's about being sort of a more intuitive user, and what drives Judy is more the same core adolescent emotional developmental needs that we all had when we were teens as well. All right, so let's talk about the tools. Obviously, the cell phone is really, for teens, it's an extension of their selves. It's part of their identity. They would feel lost without it. 51% of teens, according to OTX research, said they absolutely could not live without their cell phones. Okay, they would die without them. Today, 50 to 70% of 12 to 14-year-olds and a significant number of 5 to 9-year-olds, we're talking about these younger kids having phones, have their own cell phones. Teens, as we know, are wanting smartphones, I think in part because of the iPod and their love for Apple and its branding and its marketing. This is from Piper Jaffray. 8% of U.S. teens own an iPhone right now. It's still pretty expensive for them, but 22% want an iPhone. So they are definitely wanting the smartphones. And then Harris Interactive actually did a study where teen smartphone owners, so those that have them, so the main reason they carried their phone was an expression of personal style, right? So it's really, again, about style and self-expression, which is part of, figuring out who you are, which we're going to talk a lot about. I think with phones, it's obviously still limited by price and by parents. We talk about the iPhone and teens wanting all these smartphones, but the reality is most teens are still on, limited plans. Some of them still have their old beat-up LGs, and as long as they can text and talk, they're fine with it. As we know, it's also their watch, right, and their alarm clock. I don't know if you know any teens that still have an alarm clock. So the desktop, laptop with an internet connection, as we've been talking about, but again, not all teens have that. And Alice from Cartoon Network mentioned earlier, libraries being the sort of new town hall, the new public spaces. There are still teens that are primarily getting online and accessing computers at libraries, which is why it's important to not block social media from those sites and spaces, educate and not legislate. Obviously the iPod or the MP3 player, though we know it's mostly the iPod, 86% of MP3 owning teens own some kind of iPod. So again, we see that Mac dominating with the music player, but when we think about why teens adopted MP3 players so quickly and in such large numbers, it was because, they were already downloading free music. They needed a place to play it, and it allowed them to get songs versus albums. You don't hear teens talking about albums anymore. It's all about the song. It's all about mixing them together. So I'm not saying that teens aren't early adopters. Obviously, some did stand in line and got really excited about the iPhone, but there are different kinds of early adopter. And again, just want to